Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Perfect. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Reed Farrel Coleman about Sleepless City. Welcome, Reed.
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Oh, what a pleasure. This book was so delicious. I enjoyed it. I love the play on words for the title. Is that something that was your decision, or how did that come about?
I've titled every one of my books, and I will never change a book title because a publisher tells me to, because I was trained. The only formal training as a writer I've ever gotten is as a poet. And I've always felt the first line of a poem is the title. And so the title for me sets everything that follows.
I totally agree. I love it. And I did like the title. And of course, it's The City That Never Sleeps. The book is set in New York. Are you from New York?
Well, that's a yes and no, because when you're from Brooklyn, you're from Brooklyn.
Gotcha.
And then you're kind of from New York. So
I got
yes.
you. So one of the things that I was very impressed is your ability for voicing. I'm Southern from North Carolina, and while we sound similar, we sound different. Of course, it depends on your race, your religion, your ethnicity. I find that in reading Sleepless City, I hear these voices of people from New York or Brooklyn. Do you hear voices? And I sort of make a joke of that, but do you hear your characters' voices?
Not to compliment the host of the show too much, but for me, character often starts with voice. Like there's the authorial voice, so that someone knows it's me writing the book. But for me, how characters sound is what in some ways makes the character. I think writers often focus way too much on the visual. We're visual creatures. So, when you give tons and tons of description, it's lost its noise to us. But when people can hear something, I think when you hear a voice or as it's written, you see more and learn more about a character than you ever will by me spending a page describing the look of the character.
I agree with you 100%, and I'm not an authority at this, but that was the thing about your characters. I could actually hear them. So I have a long-term friend that's from Brooklyn, and she's Italian. And so when she makes spaghetti, she makes gravy for the spaghetti instead of sauce or spaghetti sauce or whatever. And that's what I heard in your characters. I mean, Nick Ryan is Irish, and I felt that history come with him. And then probably my favorite character may be Lenny, and I heard his voice so distinctively. Does that come natural? And I mean that seriously, because I think that for me, it's a little natural, but I don't know if it's natural for every person. Is it natural as an author for you?
Well, it sure is. Bless your heart.
There you go. You go.
Yeah. How do you say "fuck you" in the South?
Exactly. Bless your heart.
Bless your heart. Yes. I've always been able to do voices. And so that helps, because I literally sometimes do their voices aloud, and I hear them speak because I'm speaking what they might say. So yeah, I think writers are often very afraid of dialogue for lots of reasons. One of which is dialogue. I think in my books, even if I didn't attribute, he said, she said, Dan said, Pam said, you could tell they were different people speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Authors often sound, anyone who's speaking sounds like one person speaking. And so I really try very, very hard to avoid that. They all sound different from each other.
And as a reader, for me, that made it so delicious because I do get a feeling for exactly who they are. You know, Ryan is a bit of a smart ass, or maybe a whole lot of a smart ass. But at the same time, Ryan is very, very respectful. He understands his lane. He may not always stay in his lane, but when he speaks, I hear him. I did read somewhere that this book was a bit of a departure from what you usually write. Is that true?
Yeah, well, I usually write Harlequin romances.
I know better than that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a bit of a departure, and here's why. I have written lots of hard-boiled and noir, kind of rough Brooklyn, Long Island-y type of characters, but they have, and cops. I'm not a cop, never was a cop, but I know lots of cops. And the thing is that my past characters were very often stumblers. I like to think of them as stumblers.
Mm-hmm.
They had been cops, but only in uniform, so that when they became private eyes, they had no experience at being a detective, which is a very different job than being in uniform.
Yes.
So Nick is competent. Nick is ultra competent. So it was a real challenge for me, who had written 31 previous books, right, to write a character now who isn't stumbling around, who knows how to do what he does, who isn't fearful. And that is actually a huge challenge, because it's much easier to write a stumbler, because you can put him or her in all sorts of weird, inappropriate places because they don't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
But Nick knows better. So when he does something dumb, he's doing it on purpose.
That was a beautiful thing to read too, because Nick's confidence is one of the most charming things about him. And even though it's not a romance, you did write a sexy character, because I can't imagine, even though at the beginning of the book, Nick says that he's basically able to blend in, which is a talent and an art all of its own. But also people are attracted to him because of his confidence and because he's a handsome man. And that was fun to read, because I like all types, whether they're bumblers or confident. But Nick's confidence wasn't cocky. It was sure, which is a very different thing than cocky. So I loved it.
Yeah, he's not the kind of guy who's going to brag about what he's good at. He just knows he's good at it. By the way, that's the part of the book when people say, is this autobiographical? I go, yeah, the handsome, sexy part. Yeah, that's
100%. Own it, Reed. Own it.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's, you gave us in Ryan, you gave us somebody we could, Nick Ryan, somebody we could root for. And yet at the same time, he certainly wasn't a perfect character. So was that fun and interesting for you as an author?
That is probably the most fun I had, because it's a challenge to write a character who does some pretty bad things.
Yes.
Maybe for the right reasons, but does some pretty bad things. And it's no shock, like early in the book, he's going to execute somebody. He's totally determined to do it. He's made up his mind it's the right thing to do. Now, we would hate if there were a lot of Nick Ryans in the world deciding, and I think I've experienced that in our history recently. People who are sure they're doing and they mean it, they're doing the wrong thing for the right reason. And that's a challenge to write.
It must have been a fun challenge, though. I mean, honestly, it comes out so beautifully, Reed. It really does. So sorry, go ahead.
No, that's part of also understand. It's beyond voice. It's understanding your character. and not wanting to write him as a one-dimensional. You know, I hate characters that if you turn them sideways, they become invisible, because there's no substance to them. And so Nick was an interesting challenge in that I had to there's a lot of morality in this book. I'm not preaching, as you can attest. I detest
Yes.
preachiness, no matter what the point of view is. So there's a lot of morality play in this book, and that I enjoy that a lot too.
So I asked Jane Harper how she did her writing, and she said that for her, she knew the ending of a book. She knew exactly where she wanted it to end, and then she built it back to the beginning through structure, and then sat down and wrote the book all the way through. How is your structure? Do you start at the beginning, the middle, the end?
Structure? What's that?
Oh, I know better than that, Reed.
Yeah, no. I'm telling you that I seriously think about the character.
Okay.
Think about where the book starts.
Okay.
And then I let myself write the book. I never outline.
Oh, wow.
Right. And in this book, right, you're going to say, how could you write such a complex book without outlining?
Yes. Answer your own question.
Yes. Drugs.
Well, this book was definitely a drug for this reader because it was amazing. You also collect an enormous amount of characters, which sometimes for me as a reader, that can be a lot of fun, can sometimes be frustrating. But here again, all of your characters have their own voice, but you have a wide array of characters. So as you said about your structure, do these characters come in as you're writing, or do you sort of have an idea of you want some of these in, or how does that work?
Well, I wait for people to pay me to include them in the book, and no, that's it. It's and you know, I know a lot. I trust that you will believe me, and the listeners will believe me when I tell you this. So Mac, for instance, who's a bartender, when I wrote him, he was just a bartender, and as the book progressed, he then changed, and I'm not going to give away what he becomes, but as I'm thinking of what's the opportunity here. That's often what writers will always tell you. Writing is asking questions and then answering them. So the question for me, whenever a character comes on screen, because that's how I think of it, what's my opportunity with this character? Is this character just going to run on stage and say, "Hark, I hear the cannons roar"? Which, by the way, I never do. To me, there's no such thing as a minor character. But when this book began, when I wrote Mac, he was just a bartender. Now, Lenny, on the other hand, the minute I conceived Lenny, he was a complete character to me. So the answer is, which you will accept and a lot of people won't, is some of the characters grow as I write them and I see opportunities for them, and some, like Nick and Lenny, were there the minute I got their names. I was like, okay, I know this guy's whole backstory. Shayna, I knew Shayna's whole backstory. But other characters who move in and out, as I wrote the book, that's who they became.
I love that. I also like the fact that a lot of authors say, okay, I'm going to switch sort of lanes where this one character is going. And then to be able to do that is a talent, because, if Mac is just the bartender and then he grows, then you've got to look at where everyone else is and how they grow as well. There will be a...
Sorry, go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
No.
It's New Yorkers always stepping on people when they speak.
Southerners rarely shut up, so I have that hard time.
What a match, man.
We are indeed. We are. So with Nick and Lenny, did something that I could see how they could simply be business partners, so to speak. But you gave them such a loving humanity between the two of them that I was blown away. There's one part, and doesn't give anything away. Nick touches Lenny's face, and Lenny has been disfigured in a fire. That doesn't give away anything either, I don't think.
No.
But the simple act of him touching his face, it speaks volumes, and that's something that cropped up so often in this book. The simplest of things spoke volumes.
Well, I think the most intimate gesture people have between each other is brushing a cheek.
100%.
Putting a stray hair behind someone's ear. I think little gestures. I get choked up thinking about this, and I bet you do too.
I do as well.
Think the simplest gestures between people.
Yep.
Give way, just like voice is way more than describing, things for a page, which I don't do, by the way. I think small gestures, good and bad, say way more about and move plot along. Readers know the minute he touches Lenny's face that it's not business. But I didn't have to say. I didn't have to say this is not a business relationship.
And that's right. And he touches Lenny's face not to get something from Lenny, but simply to have a human moment with Lenny. And that is something that this reader appreciates so much, because it shows who each of those characters are without you describing it, as you said. Yes, the sky could be blue, but you could also give me 87 words on how blue the sky was. All I need to know is the sky was blue, maybe one description, and move on. So that your personal touches with all of your characters, not just between Nick and Lenny. I mean, Nick touches so many characters and such a wide diversity of characters too. Your protagonist basically is invisible in some ways, that he can step into almost everyone's world one way or another.
Well, I'll tell you how I learned about invisibility. Earlier in my career, to make cash, because my wife was working, and we had 2 kids who are now all grown, and I'm a grandfather this year.
So, congratulations!
Thank you. I delivered oil. I was a truck driver, and I would deliver home heating oil. And, there were people I would see every other week. And every time they would greet me as if they had never seen me before. So you find out mail people, delivery people. Do you know what your Federal Express guy looks like? Do you know what your man? You know what I mean?
I do.
Invisibility. People go, oh, that's bullshit. No, there are people you see all the time that if I asked you to describe them, you never could.
100% agree with you. I do. I find that the average human, and I'm certainly not trying to put down humankind.
Neither one of us is that. So.
No. But the average human doesn't see, they don't participate in what's going on around them. I have always known that everybody knows when I'm in the room, whether it's my big mouth or whatever it is. I cannot be invisible, but lots of people can be, and that's an art that I won't ever experience in this life, and it's okay. It's like if you're 6'5" tall, you never go in a room and hide because you're too tall. It's just the way it is. So, but I do love the fact that your protagonist can hide.
Yes, and he's good at hiding. But not only is he good at hiding this, he's good at hiding, as we would say in Yiddish, his kishkas, what's inside. So he's good at that too. But of course, there are things which make him vulnerable, like Shayna.
Yes.
And this other character whom we won't discuss. But you keep mentioning there are so many characters, right, in this book. Why this is the origin story book. And so I have one more book, at least in the series, coming out in 2024 called Blind to Midnight.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. And yeah, night themes here. And the cover will also be black, red, and white. But the first book in a series is world building. And so you have to populate it with characters who, in future books, I mean, this is the mechanics of the business. Is I've written a lot of series, and one thing you learn early on when you've done this is, let me build more characters in than I can use in every book, because maybe 2 books down the road, that character who doesn't appear in book 2 but is in book 1 becomes a very important character in book 3 or 4. So put them in now, use them later.
Well, and of course, that also helps keep the money flowing, hopefully. So, that's money? The ultimate goal.
So, Dan, when's my check for this appearance?
I am about to write it now. It'll be in the mail. Check's in the mail, Reed.
I've heard that one before, except I've heard it from publishers.
Sadly, I don't doubt that's the truth. So one other thing you do, and so I'm what I would call myself a bit of a human GPS. It's both a blessing and a curse. I understand where streets are. I'm very visual. You do something with the areas that you put your characters in that is amazing. And that is, I understand exactly where they are. I understand that pizza restaurant. I understand where the cyclone is. I understand where the highways and roads are. Does that come naturally to you, or do you have to do a bit of research to make sure you put them on the right street, headed in the right direction?
Both. I mean, the answer for me is both.
Okay.
When I talk about Coney Island, where I'm from, in Brooklyn, in fact, if you let me show you something. I don't know if you can see this. I have a tattoo. It's of the parachute jump in Coney Island.
Oh, how cool!
And my kids have this tattoo also.
I love that.
My son, and theirs have slight variations on it. My son has it on his forearm, and my daughter has it on her tricep. But it ties us all together.
I love that.
When I talk about Totonno's Pizzeria and Coney Island and where the streets are, I mean, that's where I used to hang out with my friends. We'd get high and go on the cyclone, So, we'd get high, go on the cyclone, and then go eat at Nathan's.
Yes.
So, yeah. So that area, I don't really need to research. But when I'm talking about the South Bronx near Yankee Stadium, although I've been to Yankee Stadium many times, yes, I'm a Mets fan, but I occasionally go to Yankee Stadium. The street, I'm more interested in what the streets around the stadium look like and what. So I want to give you a feel for. And I don't like what I call geography writing. I made a left turn on this street and then made a right turn on that street, and then to prove that you've read a map. You have to do it a little bit.
You do. Yeah. But I understand. Yeah, I understand when the GTO hits the pothole and it sort of springs up on the street. Right. There's probably a pothole right there. Yeah. So I mean, but it's a flavor. And that's
what's important about, to me, just like with character in the small gesture way. I want to give an idea of what a place smells like, what a place sounds like, and what it looks like, but mostly what it sounds and smells like, sometimes what things feel like, because again, we're visual creatures. So if you overload people with visual description, they are blind to it. They're deaf to it. I want people to sense other senses other than sight.
Right. I think one of your locations, it smelled like seafood and disappointment. I was like, holy shit, I think I've been there.
Yeah, I think we all have.
At one time or another.
Yeah.
So if I ask one final simple question, or maybe it's not simple, if you had to describe what the heart of this book is, what would you say the heart of this book is?
Oh, that is a difficult. It's a simple question with a difficult answer. The desire to do as much good as possible in spite of the personal cost.
Wow. Wow. I 100% believe that too. That I love very much.
Well, thank you.
So I'm going to ask you in advance. So will you come back when the next edition comes out?
I'll come back tomorrow.
Well,
this was so much fun, Dan.
Thank you.
I would come, I mean, if we've got a minute, there are times I've made over the course of my career, I've been on TV, I've done radio interviews, I've done 100 of these sorts of things. And the best ones are ones that feel like a conversation between friends. The worst ones are when the producer read a treatment for the book and hands the host cards, and you get asked the same dumb questions. Where do you get your ideas from? So this was a lot of fun for me because it felt like we've known each other forever.
Well, and I have been fortunate enough to meet both you and your wife, Roseanne, and I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed your book so much. It is Sleepless City, and it is beyond tremendous. Thank you so much, Reed, for being here.
Thanks, Dan. I hope, we have a reason to get together soon.
It's a deal. Hang on for me just a second.
Okay, sure.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.